And welcome to the program. Can you just clarify
Good to be with you, David.
For us, is the coalition once again calling for a royal commission, and into what exactly?
Well, as Angus just said there, this has been a long-standing position of the Liberal and National parties, both for a royal commission into some of the more shocking incidents we've seen, unfortunately, around our country to try and protect people. And also just a general inquiry as well into public funding in this space. Senator Jacinta Nambajimbi-Price moved this many times in the Senate in the last term. Every time it was rejected by the government. And look, I think it's very unfortunate, David, that since the defeat of the Voice, the government has effectively run scared from Indigenous policy. It seems to be doing nothing on this issue. And while this shocking instance, horrific instance, not particularly to blame on any individual in the government, the lack of action here concerns me. I think we have to move on from the Voice. We've got to get back to taking practical steps to improve people's lives. I do think that under the former Tony Abbott government in particular, strides were being made. Tony made a real commitment. He used to live in community. He'd go and see the conditions. Nigel Scullion, the former Indigenous Affairs Minister, would go on the ground. I did the same as Northern Australian Minister. We were trying to find an economic base for these communities, because the simple facts are, David, that when money goes out the door, love flies out the window. And if these camps continue without a proper economic base, the circumstances that people live in, the issues they confront are going to be as tough as we've been confronted with over this past week.
But is it as simple as Tony Abbott did a wonderful job, Labor's doing a terrible job? Do you accept, we're looking at a bipartisan failure, really? When we look at these camps, you've got a Conservative government in power in the Territory. Both sides need to accept that the systems aren't working. It's not just, Labor's fault.
I didn't say Tony fixed everything, David. I thought we were making strides. And obviously this has been an area where all sides of politics have failed over many decades. I totally accept that. But we've got to try. We've got to give it a go. And as I say, since the defeat of the Voice, the government does not seem to be giving it a go. I think
it did put in a record amount of housing funding for remote communities, $4 billion over 10 years.
But this is the problem. But this is exactly the problem, David. It's exactly why my colleague Jacinta was calling for an inquiry into the funding. It's not a money issue. Right. I mean, governments of all political persuasions have spent tens of billions, it'd be hundreds of billions over many decades on these issues, and they continue to fail. That's not the problem. So pointing to a bunch of money is not good enough. You've got to get your hands dirty. You've got to get out there into communities. You've got to take practical action to help people's lives, not just throw money at it. And look, as I'm saying here, I am trying to be bipartisan here, David. So let's move on from the Voice defeat. It was a divisive debate. It failed. We've got to move on from it. It's time for the government to pick up pick itself up out of the dirt, but dust itself off and take action here. And I'm more than happy to work with the government on these issues. Maybe it should go and appoint Tony or look to Tony Abbott for some bipartisan leadership here. Because I say, he is somebody, a leader in this country, who's taken his issues very seriously, tried to take practical action. I used to work with Noel Pearson a lot. I'd love to reach out to Noel again. I mean, it was unfortunate and very divisive, this whole debate, but we've got to move on from it.
Let's turn to the Farrer by-election, less than a week to go. This seat, of course, has been a jewel in the crown for the coalition since it was formed back in 1949. It was Tim Fischer's seat, it was Susan Lee's seat. Are you worried the coalition's about to lose Farrer?
Those things don't concern me, David. I'm worried about our country. I'm very, very worried where the country is headed. That's why I'm fighting every day to try and make things better. And I'm fighting, yes, I do believe we can make things better if the Nationals Party is elected in Farrer. But I understand why people have been disillusioned with us. I've been down there for 20 days, 15 nights, and 10 of those I've been in a swag over the past month. I'm doing everything I can to fight for them. I'd love to fight for that great part of our country again. It's a wonderful, wonderful part of our nation where we pioneered the use of irrigation and dams. It still produces 40% of our food, 60% of our fruit. And for me, it's been a great platform for my leadership because what I want for our country is for us to rediscover our pioneering spirit. I want us to do big things like that again, which we seem to have lost the ambition for. So that's what I'm trying to achieve, David. It'll be up to the people of Farrer, obviously.
Are you saying you're not worried if
they
you
elect a
lose
Nationals
Farrer?
leader or not, a Nationals member or not? Well, look, as I say, no, I'm not really. David, I didn't really expect to be in this role. It was a little bit of a shock. I'm not going to die wondering. And it's not about, for me, my political party or my own career. I do this because I love Australia and I want to see it do better than we're doing right now.
But I would suspect
so that's what I'm
some of your
I'm
colleagues, not to mention your branch members, might be worried about losing a seat like Farrer.
Yeah.
Losing seats in Parliament to One Nation isn't a worry?
I just don't. I mean, it seems it is such an alien concept. I know when I travel to Canberra that people seem to view everything through the prism of jobs for politicians. And your worries, as you put it, the worry is, well, do I keep a job? Do I keep my spot as leader?
It's whether you have seats in Parliament, surely, that matters in this business of politics,
but I mean, there are more important things in life, right? I've got 5 kids. I'm thankfully back home for a couple of nights. My son turned 17 this week. That's what I worry about.
Okay, but how can you implement change if you don't have seats in Parliament? I'm a little confused.
Yeah, of course, we've got to win. I'm in it to win it. And look, I'm fighting pretty hard to win it, but I just don't quite understand sometimes the emotional dialogue that is used in the press gallery in Canberra about these things, because what I worry about, the Australian people are worried right now. They're worried about the fact that they're paying $27,000 or more on their mortgage every year on average. $27,000 a year more. That's a worry. My job, my political party is not a worry in comparison to the difficulties that Australian families are facing under the shocking economic policies of this government.
I want to ask you about that.
That's what I'm worried about, and that's what I'm fighting to change.
No, I understand that. I'm wanting to ask you about the decision to preference One Nation ahead of the independent Michelle Milthorpe. Your great mentor, the late National Senator Ron Boswell, as you would know, was a very strong opponent of doing any preference deals with One Nation. He argued, if we imply that One Nation's a plausible second-best alternative to the LNP, then we are strengthening its position and weakening ours. And if we do that, we're doing no favours to the battlers in the bush. Why do you take a different view?
Yeah, I love Ron, and I've got huge respect for him. I miss his counsel as he passed away earlier this year, sadly. Look, under my leadership, in my view, socialists and communists always go last. They got to, because they're the ones taking freedom away from the Australian people, weakening our economic opportunities. The Teal candidate, the so-called independent here in this electorate, is fundamentally running a dishonest campaign. She's running around saying that she'd like to see more oil refineries and the like. Well, on her website, it still says that she's against any new fossil fuel projects. So I'm not exactly sure how you could build a new refinery if you're also against fossil fuel projects. The facts are, David, that these Teals and their friends in the Greens are the principal reason why the living standards of Australians have crashed 15 years. Real wages in this country are back to levels not seen since 2011. And it's their policies of restricting the use of our energy resources, of seeking to close off entire industries in our economy, that has been the principal cause of making this country weaker.
Again,
and I'll fight that every day, and that's why they've got to go down the bottom. I recommend everybody putting them down the bottom.
Well, Michelle Milthorpe, of course, rejects the Teal label, but do you have any criticism of One Nation and David Farley at all, the One Nation candidate in this contest?
Absolutely, I do. I do that too. I absolutely do. I am recommending, of course, a vote for the Nationals Party. A second is the Liberal Party. Unfortunately, David Farley in the One Nation camp is also running a dishonest campaign. He failed to let the people of Farrer know that he tried to run for the Labor Party just 4 years ago. Under Anthony Albanese's team, he tried to get rid of the former Liberal National Party government. He tried to run for a party that was for net zero. He now says he wants to scrap net zero. He said the other day at a candidates debate that he was fine with Albo's migration policy settings, even though, again, his own party's website says they want them massively slashed.
On that, I think he's tried to clean
people of.
He's tried to clean the migration thing up. But you're right to point to what he did say. What do you think on migration in a seat like Farrer? Does that part of Australia need more migrants or less?
We don't need more than we've got right now. We need much, much less. Now, as I said before, this part of our country was built by the pioneering spirit of Australians and new Australians, new migrants at the time that built the Snowy scheme. Spent a lot of great time with the Sikh community in Griffith, had a fantastic dinner with them the other night at the Kidman Wayside Inn. These are great people, great Australians that build our country.
And so what do you say to the farmers then in Farrer who might want more workers, more migrants to do some of that work, not to mention the small businesses in the seat?
Well, I get no pushback from people when I make very clearly that our policy will be to set Australia's migration settings, our numbers, in accordance with the needs of Australians, including, of course, relatively newly arrived Australians. They're Australians too, and they face the pressures of the mass migration we're seeing under this Labor government that has been contributing to that real wage drop that I mentioned, because too much migrants do put downward pressure on wages, hurts the very workers that the Labor Party purports to represent. And we do need to focus our migration program on productive economic needs, but particularly the blowout in student visa numbers are not contributing to our broader economy, and I think they're undermining the very purpose of our universities too. Our universities should be there to primarily teach Australians. But I speak to so many young Australians now who are aghast when they go into lecture theatres and the like, and there's maybe 15-20% Australian-born students there. That's not right. And this government is not doing anything now to fix up that clear anomaly.
I want to ask you about the interim report of the Bondi Royal Commission released the other day. It said the Commonwealth and states and territories should prioritise efforts to finalise and implement an updated and nationally consistent national firearms agreement and national gun buyback scheme. Does this change your view on a gun buyback?
No, it doesn't. I've read the report, and I was underwhelmed by the report. I searched thoroughly after reading it. Well, why hasn't the report dealt with the major issue? And the major issue here was not the firearms held in the hands of these two monsters. It was the ideas in their heads that were the problem. And so the Royal Commission's report mentions Islam 11 times. Most of those times are simply quotes from terror threat levels. A couple of mentions of Islamophobia as well thrown in there. But the fact that it hasn't dealt with that fundamental problem, in my view, it totally misses the mark.
So do you agree with Pauline Hanson on this, that this is a disappointing interim report from the Royal Commissioner?
Well, I'll let Pauline have her own statements on it, but I just told you what I thought of it. I was deeply underwhelmed. It just didn't seem to tackle the major cause. Just on the gun buyback, though, your colleague, the Shadow Home Affairs Minister, Jonathan Duniam, says the government should do what they said they would, that they won't stand in the way. But do you want to stand in the way of a gun buyback? Well, we didn't support the legislation. We don't support the legislation. It's up to the government now to do what it can, but up here in Queensland, I know my Liberal National Party colleagues are dead set against this. And you're against it? These just fundamentally take away, they take away rights from Australians for no benefit. I've spoken to so many people, particularly in Farrer, may I say, it would be nice if everybody tried to understand the position that farmers and lots of families who need firearms have been put in by these ridiculous caps of 5 firearms. I've spoken to many people in Farrer where they're making the choice between keeping the firearms they need for their farm, their livelihoods, and also trying to keep firearms that have been handed down from them from ancestors. Often firearms that were used in wars to defend this country. Okay. So we're forcing people to give up. Hang on, just let me finish this point, David. I'm just a bit emotional about this. We are forcing people, because Anthony Albanese just did this in a few days, right? Didn't even think about it. We are forcing Australians to give up the firearms that their fathers, their grandfathers, their great-grandfathers used to defend this country. So they've been handed down these firearms. They're not really in use anymore, of course, but they are captured by these ridiculous knee-jerk laws which say they've got to give those up, give up their Australian heritage, give up the legacy that's been passed on to them to meet some ridiculous arbitrary number. What about the checking of people with firearms? Shouldn't we have thought through this a little bit more? But the Royal Commissioner also says there appears to be no reason why ASIO should not be given access to the National Firearms Register. Do you have any problem with that? Oh no, we haven't had any problems with that aspect of the changes. That's sensible. So ASIO checking all gun owners. Yeah, no problem with that. Obviously, that's
On the budget, Matt Canavan, will you vote against any changes to property tax breaks?
Well, look, we haven't seen the details of this yet, David, but all we have seen from budget leaks is that the government wants to tax Australians more, and we're dead set against that. I mean, this week, tomorrow's Labor Day here in Queensland at least, and this week is actually also Tax Freedom Day. For the first week this week, Australians, you can, on average, you'll be working for yourself this week. Up to now, for the first third of the year, the first 4 months of the year, you've been working for the government. It's pretty sobering when you put it like that.
Back to the
4
question.
months that you're giving up. So why are we increasing taxes?
Okay,
so
back to the question.
I'm not in favour of that.
If they do make changes in the budget to negative gearing, capital gains tax, you've previously said these should be totally opposed. Would you vote against them?
Well, as I say, I'm against tax increases. So we haven't seen the details yet.
You're leaving some room there.
Specific options. Look, I'll consider them. But what I want to see is tax rates go down. I think the problem at the moment we've got is the government has given up on growth. They've effectively given up on offering hope and opportunity for the Australian people.
All right, but
they're
just
left
on your
now in a version
on
of
the
the budget
Nationals,
form of the Hunger Games, where they're looking to take from some people and give to the others. That's what
on
they're
your
doing.
party, though,
That's fundamentally what they're doing.
Okay, your candidate in Farrer, Brad Robertson, says he is open to considering changes to capital gains tax for people with multiple properties, not scrapping it altogether, but he's open to changing it for people with numerous properties. Are you on the same page?
Well, as I said, I'm waiting to see what the details are, but I don't support extra tax increases. Let's see what the government comes up with. But what I'd like
what about for people with multiple properties, if that's a tax increase for them?
Well, yeah, we've been the Labor Party themselves. The Prime Minister before the last election said he would not change negative gearing.
Sorry, your position. So if you've got multiple investment properties,
I'm not. This is what always you try and do. You try and get me to respond to something that the government hasn't even announced.
No, that your candidate has said. No, I'm asking about what your candidate in Farrer, with the by-election 6 days away, said.
Yeah. Well, we are not for tax increases on the Australian people.
Okay.
I want to see growth. I want to see opportunity. I want to see a budget that's focused on increasing the incomes and living standards of all Australians.
You've been calling for oil drilling in the Taroom Trough in Queensland to help deal with the fuel crisis that we're all experiencing. The government says it's ready to look at a proposal but still hasn't really received any of the basic details on the number of wells that would be drilled, how deep they'd need to be, the impact on groundwater and so on. If this is so urgently needed, should the Queensland government get cracking on an assessment here?
Well, the Queensland government says it has provided that information. I know the federal government says they haven't. I suppose we're in a he said, she said environment. The problem, though, is that before Christmas last year, David, the government teamed up with the Greens to exclude fossil fuel projects from the national interest test. So even if the federal government, the Labor Party's views are right, and that the Queensland government needs to provide more information, they couldn't actually sign off on this project in the national interest because, amazingly, shockingly,
they can under the existing.
The Labor Party decided.
Okay, to be clear though, they can, under the existing arrangement between the Commonwealth and the Queensland government, do an assessment at the Queensland level that can then be considered by the Commonwealth.
Yep.
Why aren't they doing that?
The thing though, David, is, the problem with that assessment is it has enormous timeframes under the EPBC Act. It requires consultation.
They could get started,
groups, as we've seen many times, can hang on. Yeah, okay, but you're still looking at a minimum, David. You're looking at 2 or 3 years. The problem is we have now got the ridiculous situation that the federal government cannot rule that a new oil project, a new diesel refinery is not in the national interest. They can't do that. Sorry, is in the national interest. They can't do that because they excluded fossil fuel projects from the national interest exemption.
Well, the new
as we can see right now, is there much more that's more in the... Is there much more... Yeah, but the streamlined pathway is 2 years, David. Is there much more that would be in our national interest right now than getting a new oil field open, than getting a diesel refinery working? That would clearly be in our national interest, yet the government doesn't think so because it teamed up with the Greens. So they can approve a massive new solar project with the stroke of their pen, but no one in the world is running around, the government's not running around the world begging for solar panels. They're running around the world begging our close neighbours for oil. So why would the government be doing so desperately do that, but not willing to fast track here and provide a national interest exemption for an oil project in Australia? Now, we've offered to change that back. We actually moved an amendment last sitting week, so let's get rid of that. Let's exclude the Greens here and get back onto the land of common sense where the national interest does include the drilling for oil in this country. The government rejected that. That offer remains on the table. We're happy to be constructive, but let's get cracking here, guys. let's focus on Australia again and our own fuel security.
Nationals leader Matt Canavan will have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us this morning.